Daughter Disney podcast. My name is Amanda. I'm here with my lovely mother.
Hi, I'm Janette.
And today we are doing our next era in the Disney movie era. So now we are doing the wartime era. So a few months ago at this point, we did the first movie era, which was the golden era. The first one, the one that launched it all. And now we are in the next era, the wartime era. So definitely suggest going back to listen to that podcast, but we'll fill it in a little bit, right? So all right, we got 10 pages of notes here, and I will have all of my links kind of in the description of this podcast. Most of it is from Wikipedia, if I'm being honest. So thank you to Wikipedia.
That's all history.
Right. So the wartime era is officially from 1942 to 1949, and this is also known as the package film era. So due to the financial underperformance of Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi from the golden era, the limitations of World War II, and because of limitations, they couldn't have global runs of these movies. Disney's financiers at Bank of America would only continue to support the studio's animated projects if Walt Disney stuck to less costly work of producing shorts. So initially, Disney wanted to work on some big features like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, but ultimately all of these got put on hold. So Disney ended up taking a deal with the U.S. Army to create propaganda shorts to help promote the draft of World War II. And with this money, they were able to continue to produce animations. So a lot of people know too that Walt Disney himself was quite the American patriot, so it wasn't much for him to agree to this. So from 1943 to 1949, the studio produced 31 shorts bundled into 6 features, and that is why it's called the package film era, because everything was packaged into these 6 features. I'm not going to go through necessarily every single summary of every single short, just because there are 31 shorts technically, but we'll summarize some of them though. So these shorts range in length from a few minutes to about a half hour long, and the subject matters also range as well from, again, Mickey Mouse, Goofy, Donald, again, all different types of things, as well as, again, that abstract interpretations of music as well that we kind of saw in Fantasia. All these, and also note too, all of these films are produced by Walt Disney Production and released by RKO Radio Pictures. So I'm not going to say that for each of the 6 films, but they were all produced by Walt Disney and they were all released by RK Radio Pictures.
I remember the RKO symbol.
So, all right. So the first up we have in 1942, Saludos Amigos. So Saludos Amigos, which is Spanish for greetings friends, is a 1942 American live action animated anthology set in Latin America. It is made up of 4 different segments. And so the four different segments, the first is called, and also I'm going to apologize for any of my mispronunciation here. So the first is Lake Titicaca. So Donald visits Lake Titicaca in Bolivia and Peru and meets some of the locals. The next is Pedro. Pedro is a story about a small anthropomorphic airplane flying from an airport near Santiago, Chile, and he's flying to deliver mail to Mendoza, and he has the adventures basically that he goes on his first flight. The next is El Gaucho Goofy. American cowboy Goofy gets taken from Texas to the Argentinian Pampas by the narrator to learn the ways of the native gaucho. And the last one in this package film is the Aquarela de Brazil, which is Portuguese for watercolor of Brazil, and this is the finale of the film where Disney artists create pictures that magically turn into other pictures.
Wow,
essentially.
I don't remember any of those.
So this film was developed as part of the studio's contribution to the U.S. Good Neighbor policy toward Latin America during World War II. So some history behind this, and essentially the Good Neighbor policy was a campaign by the U.S. to improve its relations with Latin America. This was specifically a concern because in the late 1930s there was a lot of Nazi propaganda that was being sent to the Americas in a general sense, not just North America but South and Central America as well. And this was also to divide North America from South and Central America too, to kind of try to weaken North America, specifically the U.S. So to counter the Nazis, President Franklin D. Roosevelt founded in 1940 to 1941 the Office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, which through U.S. propaganda, they wanted to, again, kind of counteract the Nazi propaganda with U.S. propaganda, basically. So the chief coordinator, Nelson Rockefeller, asked Walt Disney to produce a few short films with themes friendly to Latin America, and Disney actually traveled with many of the Disney animators to Latin America to, see what it was all about, so they can be inspired to create films. Yeah. What they do basically now too with their other films.
Right.
And also important to note too that Mickey Mouse and some of the other Disney characters were quite popular in Latin America, so that's kind of why they wanted to use the Disney characters for this as well. So in early 1941, before the U.S. entry into World War II, the film itself was given, so again, to fund this film, the U.S. government actually helped fund some of these films specifically because, or they had, rather I should say they had loan guarantees because they were as part of this good neighbor policy, right? So the Disney studio had overexpanded previous to to this era, just because again, before World War II, essentially they had overexpanded European markets. Of course, they could not expand to European markets anymore. So now they're expanding into the Latin and Central American markets instead. And because Disney was struggling with labor at the time, and there's a lot of unrest in general in the country, it was a good deal basically to take overall. So this film specifically, Saludos Amigos, the film included live action documentary scenes featuring footage of the modern Latin American cities with skyscrapers and like people in like their normal dress as well. And at the time, again in the 1940s, this was a surprise to many of the contemporary US viewers because they'd only ever seen like skyscraper type cities associated with the US and Europe and not with Latin America and South America.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was the first time that they saw like how built up South and Latin America really was. So film historian also said too that the film historian Alfred Charles Richard Jr. had commented that Saludos Amigos did more to cement a community of interest between the people of the Americas in a few months than the State Department had in 50 years. So this film and the next film,
Why am I not surprised?
So this film and the next film, The Three Caballeros, had actually done again a lot more for again the good neighbor policy than like anything else is kind of doing. Right. So the film also then to note too, because this was a big thing that I read too. Again, I don't know a lot about Latin American cartoonists or their culture as much, but the film inspired Chilean artist cartoonist René Riaz Botier to create Condorito, who is one of the most famous cartoon characters in Latin America. Condorito is a direct response to the short Pedro because Botier, the cartoonist, he didn't think that Chile was properly represented in the short with Pedro, who is that was the anthropomorphine, So he ended up creating Condorito in response to again properly represent Chile. And because of that, he ended up creating the most popular character in Latin America, which I thought was kind of cool. So, all right. So Saludos Amigos premiered in Rio de Janeiro on August 24th, 1942. It was later released in the United States on February 19th, 1943. It was nominated for the Academy Awards for Best Scoring of a Musical Picture, Best Original Song for Saludos Amigos, and Best Sound Recording. It didn't win any of these, but it was nominated. And the film was a success, and it also helped launch the international popularity of Donald Duck as well. And then this also helped The Three Caballeros, where Donald Duck is basically one of the main stars for The Three Caballeros.
Right, that's like his main character at this point, yeah.
And again, because it was that government-funded film, it did very good again for the U.S. and the Latin American relations as well, especially during a time of like strife with World War II going on. The movie officially made $1.13 million, which in today's money would be $14.36 million.
I was going to say back then that was a lot of money.
Now this is drastically less than what any of the movies in the golden era made, honestly, by millions and millions of dollars.
It was a different time.
But again, all of these movies, none of them made that much money because again, they weren't having wide releases. So they're having very limited releases, really only in some parts of the US and some parts of Latin and Central America and South America, right? So again, so that's why they're not like making like the big bucks, so to speak, the way like Snow White, even what Dumbo made. So, all right, now we're on to our second movie, The Three Caballeros. The Three Caballeros came out in 1944. It is the second film to be produced as part of the good neighbor policy between the US and South and Central American countries. And the film celebrates the 10th anniversary of Donald Duck as he follows his journey through Latin America, combining live action with traditional animation. So Donald is joined by some of the returning characters from Saludos Amigos, specifically Jose Carioca from Brazil, who is one of the parrots that you see. And then the new companion is the pistol tootin' rooster, Panchito. So also from Mexico. And the narrative is presented through a series of self-contained segments linked by the framing device of Donald receiving a birthday gift from his Latin American friends. It also features some famous Latin American performers such as Aurora Miranda, Dora Luz, and Carmen Molina. And it consists of 7 segments. So the first segment is the cold-blooded penguin. A penguin named Pablo is so fed up with the freezing conditions of the South Pole that he decides to leave his home for warmer climates, and he basically ends up in South America. The flying Gorchito, the adventure of a little boy from Uruguay, and the winged donkey who goes by the name of Burrito. Bea, which Donald and Jose meet up with some of the locals and they learn to dance the samba. Los Pesados, this is the story of a group of Mexican children who celebrated Christmas by reenacting the journey of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and St. Joseph searching for a room at the inn. Mexico, Pazucaro, Veracruz, and Apocul. Panchito gives Donald and Jose a tour of Mexico City and the country of Mexico on a flying serape or like a magic carpet. And then the final 2 kind of get lumped together, which I thought was interesting. But they're called You Belong to My Heart and Donald's Surreal Riviere. And Donald falls in love with singer Dora Luz, and the adventure that kind of spurs on from him falling in love with the singer. So there is a lot of music throughout this film, so much it takes up like 2 full scrolls on Wikipedia. So I'm not going to go through all of the music, mainly because I honestly don't know all the songs. But something to note is that all the music was written or inspired by other popular Mexican songs at the time. Right. And I really love that a lot of the Mexican songwriters actually came in and wrote a lot of the songs specifically for this film. Most of the critics were relatively perplexed by the technological, like the colors and everything in the film as well, especially again having that the animated film laid on top of live action people. And they also said that because it was such a contrast at the time that they said there was a lot of like flash in this, but they said they didn't think there was like much substance in compared to previous Disney films.
Okay.
And other reviewers also didn't really like the idea of Donald Duck lusting after like flesh and blood women, so to speak. That's literally what Wikipedia said, like real people.
Okay.
And I didn't really touch upon this, but in a lot of these, Donald Duck is almost always going after a female character. So, and a lot of people, I guess, were just disturbed by that thought, I suppose.
Okay.
So it kind of got negative reviews.
Never
in that
noticed
sense.
that really before. Okay.
But it was nominated at the Academy Awards for the best scoring of a musical picture and best sound recording. Now, you've been on the Mexico ride in Epcot, you notice a few scenes from the movie are basically in this ride, such as Donald Duck is flying on the Serape, which is a nod to Mexico, Pazuco, Veracruz, and Acapulco. There's, again, in almost every single short, Donald is pining after some woman, which is essentially also kind of the plot as well of the ride, that he leaves the band for a second to go after all these women, which is, again, I just thought was interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Didn't realize it.
Yeah, in Los Posados, Jose and Pinchito show Donald the tradition of the piñata, and in the ride we actually see a Donald Duck piñata on the ride, which I thought was kind of cool. And in Bahia, Donald learns the samba, and again, Donald's kind of dancing some of the samba scenes, and again, in some of the scenes on the ride too. So I thought it was kind of cool, just because, again, I haven't really seen this film before, all the shorts, so a lot of it has taken risks straight from it, and that's kind of what inspired the ride, which makes sense though. I just didn't know that. All right, so the film premiered in Mexico City on December 21st, 1944, and was then released in the US on February 3rd, 1945, and it did release in the United Kingdom in March of 1945 as well. And ultimately, it made $3.35 million, which would be $42.4 million today. All right, so up next in 1946, we have Make Mine Music as our next in the wartime era. So again, many of the Disney animators had been drafted into the army, and those that remained were called in to make these government and training propaganda films. So at the time, there was lots of unfinished ideas, a lot of unfinished stories that were just kind of floating around the studio at this point. This is officially the third package film, but it's also the only one that was entered in the 1946 Cannes Film Festival, which I thought was kind of interesting. It is made up of 10 segments. So all right, let's get into the 10 segments. First up is The Martins and the Coys. This featured radio vocal group The Kingsmen. Blue Bayou, which featured some animation originally for Fantasia but didn't quite make it. All the Cats Join In featured music by Benny Goodman and his orchestra. Without You, which was like a ballad song sung by Andy Russell. Casey at the Bat, which featured Jerry Colonna reciting the poem Casey at the Bat by Ernest Thayer. Two Silhouettes, which was a ballet type of animation with Dinah Shore singing. Peter and the Wolf, a boy and his friends go into the forest basically to hunt a wolf.
I remember that.
There was a very in-depth summary of this one, but to sum it up, that's essentially what it is. After You've Gone, which features music by Benny Goodman and the Goodman Quartet. Fedora and Alice Bluebonnet. Two Hats in a Department Store Fell in Love. Two Hats in a Department Store Fell in Love, and the music is sung by the Andrews Sisters. And then the finale, which is The Whale Who Wanted to Sing at the Met, which is a story about a whale who dreams of being an opera singer. So the film overall had positive critic for it being colorful and very imaginative, but overall people didn't think it stood up to what Fantasia was, so it didn't really have super popular critic though. It was released on April 20th of 1946, and again, like all of the other films, didn't have the huge theatrical release, so it made $3.2 million, which would be $41.1 million today. All right, so up next is our fourth movie in this era. In 1947, Fun and Fancy Free came out.
Oh, I remember the title. Okay.
This film is a compilation of two stories. The first is Bongo, narrated by Dinah Shore and loosely based on the short story. So this film is a compilation of two stories. Bongo, narrated by Dinah Shore and loosely based on the short story Little Bear Bongo by Sinclair Lewis. And it's basically the story of a circus bear named Bongo who dreams of being free from the circus and living in the wild. And the second story in Fun and Fancy Free is Mickey and the Beanstalk, which is narrated by Edgar Bergen and is loosely based on the Jack and the Beanstalk fairy tale. And though the film is primarily animated, there are some live action segments starring Edgar Bergen, and he joins the two stories together. So, all right, so we're going to jump back in time for a second for some background for this film specifically. In the late 1930s, Mickey was falling out of popularity behind Donald Duck, Goofy, Pluto, and also more specifically Max Fletcher's Popeye and Warner Brothers' Porky Pig.
Okay.
So Mickey was falling behind his own friends as well as Popeye and Porky Pig, which is funny because who has stood the test of time?
I know. So, Mickey.
So to boost his popularity, Disney and the artists had created cartoons such as The Brave Little Tailor and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which latter, of course, was in Fantasia in 1940. And in early 1940, during production of Fantasia, animators Bill Cottrell and T. He had pitched the idea of a feature film based on Jack and the Beanstalk, starring Mickey Mouse and Jack with Donald Duck and Goofy as like the supporting characters. So when they pitched it to Disney thought it was so funny, he literally apparently according to them, he had burst out laughing with tears rolling down his cheeks with joy. Like he thought it was such a fun concept, such a fun idea. And he enjoyed the pitch so much, he actually had other employees listen to it because he thought it was such a great idea. However, even though he really enjoyed the pitch, he decided not to go into production just yet because he didn't want his characters, because essentially I think in the original Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack dies, and I think he didn't want Mickey to die was the thing.
Okay.
Because he said he didn't want to murder his characters was the main problem was there. Or like I think maybe the giant dies, like Jack kills the giant in one of the original stories.
Jack's supposed to kill the giant in the
which I'm pretty sure is
fairy
Goofy.
tale.
So he didn't want his characters dying though. So initially it didn't go into production.
They had to figure out how to get around that.
Well, it didn't go to production at first, but then it was greenlit eventually because again, I think they said like we'll make it obviously lighter, no one will die in the story type of thing. And so it was greenlit, and it was initially called The Legend of Happy Valley, and it went into production on May 2nd of 1940. So if I say The Legend of Happy Valley, it's Mickey and the Beanstalk, which it got renamed to basically at the very end. It got renamed to that. But it was The Legend of Happy Valley for the longest time. So the original treatment was again more or less the same of what will become the final film, but there were a few interesting deleted scenes. Specifically, there was a deleted scene where Mickey took the cow to the market where he meets Honest John and Gideon from Pinocchio, who con him into trading his cow for the magic beans. And another version of this scene, Mickey gave the cow to the queen, who was played by Minnie Mouse, as a gift, and in return, she gave him the magic beans. But in the end, every scene of how Mickey got the magic beans got cut, and the film does not explain how Mickey got the magic beans.
Well, that's the biggest thing of it. Okay. I'm
so that was kind of funny. But I was like, okay.
Well, you talk about Jack and the Beanstalk. How he got conned out of his his cow is the biggest story. Okay.
So also to note too, shortly after the rough animation of Dumbo was complete in May of 1941, again, Mickey and the Beanstalk went into production using the same animation crew. But at the time, Radio Solutions, who was the distributor, Radio RKO Solutions, they didn't think that Mickey and the Beanstalk was basically going to be a success. It was already a low budget kind of simple film to begin with. And in 6 months, they already had 50 minutes of the film already created. But then on October 27th, 1941, Disney had the infamous animators strike, and then World War II had hit. And basically everything, all the other movies had been flopping already to begin with. They were in so much serious debt, so they put Mickey and the Beanstalk, or at the time, The Legend of Happy Valley, on hold for a little bit. But meanwhile, the production on Bongo had already started as well. And this was a film based on the short story written by Sinclair Lewis for Cosmopolitan magazine in 1930. It was suggested that Bongo could be a sequel to Dumbo, and some of the cast from the 1941 film of Dumbo could be in Bongo as well as like the supporting characters. However, that actually just never happened. So Bongo is still a completely separate story from Dumbo. So originally the designs for the characters were more realistic, but then when paired with the fun and fancy-free designs, they were like, actually, let's make them more like cartoony. So it ended up becoming more of a cartoony. Just like a fun fact, I suppose, but the script was considered complete on December 8th, 1941, which was the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So of course, when this happened too, this also, of course, got shelved for a little bit. And then also says too, around this time as well. Yeah, so when this was shelved, the other early versions of Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan were also shelved too, basically like at the same time as Bongo. And then during and after the war. So originally Disney felt that the animation of Bongo and Mickey and the Beanstalk was not sophisticated enough to be a Disney animated feature film, but the artists still wanted to finish these films and put them together as a package film. So throughout the 1940s, Disney was originally going to pair Mickey and the Beanstalk with The Wind in the Willows, which will be another movie we'll get to in a second, which was also in production around this time too. And he wanted to call those two ones the Two Fabulous Characters instead. But ultimately, Mickey and the Beanstalk was cut from the Two Fabulous Characters, I say in quotes, and it was paired with Bongo, and then that's when it became fun and fancy free. And then by the late 1947, Wind in the Willows was paired with The Legend of Sleepy Hollow instead, and then both of those didn't even stay as Two Fabulous Characters. It got renamed to The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, which again, we'll get to that one later on. So Disney had provided the voice for Mickey Mouse since his debut in 1928, and in Fun and Fancy Free, this was the last time he would voice the role regularly, as it just says he no longer had the time to kind of do so. Like, life was busy, so he didn't get a chance to do it anymore. But this was the last time he was doing it as like a regular role, and he recorded most of Mickey's dialogue in the spring and summer of 1941. And then later on, it would be sound effects artist Jimmy McDonald who became the character's new voice starting in 1948. But again, Disney did eventually reprise his Mickey Mouse, voice acting role from 1955 to 1959 for the run of the Mickey Mouse Club. Anyway, though, so for Fun and Fancy Free, celebrities Edgar Bergen and Dinah Shore introduced the segments in order to appeal to mass audiences. You got to have that A-list celebrity in there, right?
Back then, they were big celebrities.
And they did have Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio singing I'm a Happy-Go-Lucky Fellow. And this song was actually written originally for Pinocchio before its release, but it got cut from the movie, so they just put it into this one instead to have a familiar character kind of within, especially from Pinocchio, which was successful, TBT, and have it in Fun and Fancy Free. And overall, the film did have a positive critic response, but some thought the film was off balance because, again, the technical work was really good, but they didn't think the stories were as imaginative as some of the other stories Disney had done before. So the film was officially released on September 27th, 1947, and it made $3.1 million, which is $39.9 million today. So, all right, now to our next film. In 1948, we have Melody Time. Melody Time is made up of 7 segments set to popular music and folk music, so sort of like Make Mine Music, and also sort of similar to Fantasia, but they were using popular music of the time. So popular music from the 1940s is what is in Melody Time. So according to Disney, Disney had said, in the grand tradition of Disney's greatest musical classics, such as Fantasia, Melody Time is, again, very similar. It's going to feature 7 classic stories, each enhanced with high-spirited music and unforgettable characters, a feast for the eyes and ears full of wit and charm, a delightful Disney classic with something for everyone. So the 7 segments are, first up, we have Once Upon a Winter Time. This segment features Frances Langford singing the title song about 2 romantic young lovers on a winter day in December during the late 19th century. Then we have Bumble Boogie. This segment presents a surrealistic battle for a solitary bumblebee as he tries to ward off a visual and musical frenzy. The Legend of Johnny Appleseed, a retelling of the story of John Chapman, who spent most of his life roaming the Midwestern U.S. in the pioneer days and planting apple trees, thus earning his famous nickname. Little Toot, the story of Little Toot by Hardy Gramacki, in which the title protagonist is a small tugboat in New York City, and he wanted to be just like his father, Big Toot, but he could not seem to stay out of trouble. The next one is called Trees, and this is a recitation of the 1913 poem Trees by Joyce Kilmer, featuring music by Oscar Rosbach and performed by Fred Waring and the Pennsylvanians. The next one is Blame It on the Samba, which is with Donald Duck and Jose Carioca, who meet the Arukian bird, who introduces them to the pleasures of the samba, which is kind of a callback back to the Saludos Amigos. And then we have Pecos Bill, which is the finale, short here, and it follows about the Texas famous hero Pecos Bill. Raised by coyotes, he became the biggest and best cowboy that ever lived. So in late 1947, Disney announced he'd be releasing a regrouping of various cartoons at his studio under 2 titles, Melody Time and 2 Fabulous Characters, to be released in August 1948 and 1949, respectively. The Melody of Time, of course, came out first, and then 2 Fabulous Characters got renamed later on. So Melody Time ended up being released a few months earlier than planned, actually in May. I didn't say why it got released earlier, but they just did. So Melody Time is also considered to be the last official anthology feature made by Walt Disney Productions. So even though technically the next one, which is the 2 Fabulous Characters,
they were already doing
that got renamed to The Adventures of Mr. Bob and Mr. Toad. That one still featured 2 stories as well, but this one is still considered like the last package film though, here in the wartime era. So for Melody Time, while the shorts contrast in length, form, and style, there is still a common thread as they're all accompanied by songs and musicians and vocalists from the 1940s. Again, all popular music and folk music from the time. And again, this sets it apart from the similarly structured Fantasia, because Fantasia was all set to classical music instead. And also, as opposed to Funny and Fancy Free, whose tales were kind of bound to the stories of who Bongo and who like Jack and the Beanstalk kind of were, the animators had more imaginative, freedom for like colors and animation and ideas. So they had much more free reign in this film. And then again, Melody Time was the last feature film to include Donald Duck and Jose Carioca until 1988, where Touchstone Pictures had Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and that's where Donald and Jose would come back. So at the time of its release, Melody Time was actually quite underwhelming for a lot of the critics. They still said that the technical advances of animation was still quite impressive. And further down the road, more critics would say that the mixing of the shorts with the 1940s music just didn't work, was the main thing, is what people said. I'm not really sure because I was not living in the time of the 1940s. Yeah,
I wasn't even alive then either. So
yes, I don't know if I would have thought that the animation would mix with that type of music. But a lot of people said too that that it didn't mix well, such as the classical music with Fantasia apparently mixed very well. There was also a lot of controversy in the 1990s on this film for the heavy smoking in Pecos Bill, because even though they were all shorts, they all were released separately as well too. And Pecos Bill became the most famous one from this specific short from Melody Time. And because Pecos Bill was smoking so heavy, of course, in the 1990s, we had the whole pushback against smoking. Right. So they actually removed a lot of the animation of Pecos Bill smoking for the VHS release, as well as some of the worldwide releases. But now when you watch it, there's a lot of weird hand movements of Bill because now he's no longer smoking. Right. So they like oddly took it out. So there's a lot of things like that apparently too, even with his facial movements too. They say like it looks a lot different from how it originally looked, because I guess he was just smoking every single scene is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I guess he always had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth.
Yeah, because now even when you try to watch this on Disney Plus, you do only see the scenes where they've cleaned it up a bit, where he's not smoking. Look at
some of the old westerns, they always have a cigarette hanging out of their mouths, right?
So, and I feel like now in present day, I think a lot of like the old animations and stuff like that, they just now have that thing that comes on the screen first, being like, this story does not depict what the company currently stands for. Right. We don't stand by a lot of these actions or anything like that, but we're keeping it the same for integrity's purpose and for what it was, for when it was. But again, in the 1990s, I think they panicked and they're like, let's just take it out. So it is what it is. Sorry, Melody Time was released on May 27th, 1948. And Disney also then, again, he released, so again, because all of these movies are made up of like little segments technically, right? Yep. So he also kind of took some of the segments out of this, and he took some of the segments out of Make Music Mine. online, and he called it Musicland. And he also released another feature film called Musicland that has kind of segments from each, but that one doesn't really get talked about anywhere online, so I didn't really include it in this.
Phrase, yeah. I've
but
heard
again,
of the other ones.
Again, a good thing to say too here as well, all these segments did eventually get released too on their own too as their own short. They were just packaged up as these films as well. So that's why it's like kind of hard sometimes to do like how much money did they make, because it's like how much money did the film make, but against some of these other ones, like they made more on their own. So it's kind of weird. But for officially, Melody Time made $2.5 million, which is $32.3 million today. All right, we're sticking in there. All right, we're to our final movie here in the wartime era, in 1949, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad.
Oh, wow.
Again, this was originally going to be the two fabulous characters. So it consists of two segments. The first based on Kenneth Graham's 1908 children's novel, The Wind and the Willows, narrated by Basil Rathbone. And the second is based on Washington Irving's 1820 short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and narrated by, you know who's narrated by? I feel like you know this person very well.
I probably should know. No.
It's narrated by Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby. I should, yeah. Like I said, I know it's probably somebody I know.
One of the famous people from that time, yeah.
Because by the time I was a kid, these were not so old so that you started, seeing them and hearing them.
So Walt Disney was introduced to Kenneth Graham's children's novel, The Wind and the Willows, which was written in 1908, but Disney was introduced to it in 1934. So his brother, Roy Disney, actually acquired the rights to the novel during a European acquisition spree when in 1938. And Disney was actually not initially interested in the story. He thought it was too corny to be like a film, but it wasn't until story artist James Barrero read the book and convinced Walt to put The Wind and the Willows into the production, and it was originally intended to be a single narrative feature. So the first story meetings were held in September 1940, and then again it went into production the next month, but again it was put on hold due to all the other problems that were going on. And a lot of the animators who worked on The Wind and the Willows also worked on Bambi as well. So once they were kind of done with Bambi, a lot of them moved over here to Wind and the Willows. And again, it was put on hold multiple times again throughout the years. But then back in October 1941, after that animator strike also settled, at the same time, Joseph Rosenberg at Bank of America issued an ultimatum to Disney that he would permit an absolute loan limit of $3.5 million. And in return, he ordered the Disney studio to restrict itself to producing animation shorts and to finish features already in production, which at the time was Dumbo and Bambi.
Right.
But again, no other film feature could be worked or released basically until they had earned back their costs. So they had to finish what they were already doing and do some of the shorts, and they had to earn back their costs, and that's what the loan people were telling Disney. So in response, again, everything was heavily scaled back, but the thing is though, because The Wind and the Willows was already in production, they actually could keep it in production because they technically already started.
Get it finished.
So after reviewing the animation footage a few weeks later, Disney decided to shelve the project though, because he still felt like the quality of it was too far below the standard necessary for it to be successful. Because remember, this was supposed to be a standalone film still at the time. So he shelved it at that time. Even though he shelved it, there was already 3,000 feet of animation that was completed when they decided to shelve it and they put it on hold. And in 1942, The Wind and the Willows was officially put on hold. But do not worry, because then in 1943, it came back to production. So many times this film went on hold and came back to production. Right?
This is a classic.
What's the third time?
When you think about it,
For the third time, right?
So much deciding, and it is a classic.
I know, right? So it resumed production in October of 1943, and it was the only feature that Bank of America allowed to proceed during World War II aside of Peter Pan, because again, they were supposed to be a single feature film. So this one and Peter Pan were the only two that during World War II that being worked on. And around this time, this is when Disney decided to combine The Wind and the Willows with either The Legend of Happy Valley, which was Mickey and the Beanstalk,
right, Mickey and the Beanstalk,
from Fun and Fancy Free, or he wanted to pair it with The Gremlins, which was an original story developed by Disney by Roald Dahl into a package film. The Gremlins obviously never came to be.
No.
So his brother Roy disapproved of the idea, calculating that the project would not recoup the money that they already put into this film, essentially, for it to be packaged like with these two other films. But The Wind and the Willows underwent additional story treatment in 1944, in February of 1944, and in general, the film was just progressing very slowly throughout production. And then after finishing his military service in World War II, one of the lead animators, his name was Frank Thomas, he returned to the Disney studio in April 1946 and was assigned to direct additional footage alongside some other animators in hopes of salvaging the project. Again, now it's been put on hold multiple times. It's been changing stories. Then they're going to package it with another story. Then they weren't going to package it with a story. And basically, on final orders from Disney, the film was shortened down from a full-length feature film to about 25 minutes.
Wow.
So The Wind and the Willows was once again shelved again because Disney themselves had some layoffs in August of 1946. And a lot of the lead animators, not only did they lay off some people, some of the lead animators also left to another studio as well. And some of the other animators who were working on The Wind and the Willows went to go work on Johnny Appleseed, which was for the segment for Melody Time, which we just discussed. And then again, this is we're in 1946, so it was shelved again. Then in October of 1946, we're back in production. So we're going back and forth a lot with this film. The fact it even got made is insane to me. So now we have, again, a whole new set of animators essentially. family. And they were brought in to work out the pace of the story and to add more like gags, like more little funny bits to it to kind of bring it back to life. And in early 1947, Disney started production on the animated version of The Legend of the Sleepy Hollow. And this was to be co-directed by Kinney and Clyde Geromini. And like Wind in the Willows, it was originally intended to be a feature film, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Right.
But in November of 1947, Disney decided to pair both productions into a singular package titled Two Fabulous Characters, as neither was long enough to be a full feature film. And so the project was scheduled to be released in the 1949, and eventually it did get renamed to The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So while critics did praise the animation on both stories, they felt like the pairing of these two stories was kind of odd and didn't really work well because they were very different from each other. But even though the animation was very good and the stories themselves were very good, they were just like the pairing is just not very good. So The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad was released in theaters on October 5th, 1949. And the beginning in 1955, the two segments of the film were officially separated and they were televised as their own like television series separated. And they were later again marketed and sold separately on home video as well.
Right.
And it made $1.6 million, which is one of the lower ends of the package film, which today is $20.9 million. So again, The Wind in the Willows truly went through it. They went back and forth. It's so funny. They back for 10 years. So for about 10 years, it went back and forth until it's finally finished, created, packaged, and then for people to be like, this makes no sense to package it. It just needs to be a standalone for it to ultimately become a standalone
short.
anyway.
Well, technically a short, not a full length. Yeah.
Now, of course, too, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is one of the most infamous, I feel like, animations now to this day.
It is. I mean, even to this day, I mean, everybody knows The Legends of Sleepy Hollow, and Disney's version of it is just so iconic.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the, not the problem, but like one of the things, again, I'm looking back on it, it's just like they didn't need to be packaged together because I think The Legend of Sleepy Hollow probably would have prevailed even if they had released it. Even if it's just like a short, it probably would have prevailed even as its own, as a short as well. And I mean, like, even just now, if you think about in the parks too, it's just, you know, that's the main reason why you go to Mickey's Not So Scary Party, right? Is to see the Headless Horseman come down. Like that, that legend is just so famous and so infamous. Yeah. So it's just kind of wild. And yeah, the legend that they leave behind.
Well, it's just like every other thing. You can never tell. I mean, they
that's
make
true.
these
Like,
low-budget movies now
that's
even.
A good point. Yeah.
You know, they make these low-budget movies thinking they're going to be like just low-budget movies, get them out there, we'll make, you know, whatever. And they become blockbusters because you never can tell what people are going to grab onto.
For sure. So again, now we are at the end of the wartime era. We're in 1949. The war ended a couple years ago, actually, because it ended in like in 1945, I'm pretty sure. But the war is over, but Disney has lost so much money. They've had flop after flop. They've done all these package films. They need to pick up speed. They need to do something to fling themselves not only back to the top of the charts in films and movies, but also back as one of the lead animators in the scene at the time of the movie. So what do? Well, we're going to enter the Silver Era next. That will be our next one. And the next movie to fling them back to the top truly is one of the most famous movies that Disney will ever release. So it will all the war. We got to struggle through the 10 years of the wartime era to make it to the next era.
Well, then the Silver Era is going to be good for me. It's going to be very interesting for me too, because at that point, then I'm a kid. You know, I'm a kid now coming up on Disney
because that starts
movies.
in 1950. So,
right.
Yeah, so, but all right, yeah. So that was the wartime era. So I feel like this is often known as like the forgotten era as well, because a lot of people
because a lot of these little cartoons and shorts and stuff, you'll see them, but like you said, that's something that really sticks. Yeah,
like for instance, like Pecos Bill still lives on. Like he has Pecos Bill Tavern and Magic
certain
Kingdom,
characters,
the Three Caballeros, like certain characters, certain tidbits from it. But overall, as films, no one talks about these films. Even a lot of the shorts have kind of been forgotten to history as well. Of course, too, I didn't go over like all of the other controversies with some of these films for racial undertones and things like that. That's within
every
like,
Disney film that comes out, even to this day.
Yeah, especially from like the 1940s as well. Like it was a different time, of course. So again, some of these shorts didn't age well as well.
That's another whole podcast
for sure. So, but again, we even touch upon that. But again, a lot of these films I haven't even really seen. I've just seen some of the shorts. I haven't really seen them as full films. Again, often known as the forgotten era. So, but all right, yeah. So we'll get into the Silver Era next. That will be the next one in this series.
I'm looking forward to that one because that one will really be things that I remember and how I first saw them.
Yeah, well, the Silver Era has like it has like box office after box office. That's for sure. It's one of the good eras. That's for sure. Other than the Renaissance era, the Silver Era is one of the best ones. But all right, so now this is normally where we do a little bit of Disney news, but this is a very pre-recorded episode at the moment. So I would say the biggest Disney news is probably happening right now in early August. Again, it's like I know we said this last week. Again, Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party will be starting soon. The Oogie Boogie Bash is starting soon. I'm sure a lot of like the fall and Halloween treats will start to be ramping up a little bit. The Food and Wine Festival is still happening in Epcot as well, which is I'm sure is really great as well too. So, yeah, so lots of fun things in the parks, and I'm sure too like probably a lot of new treats and different things going on, and also some things to like close out the summer too. So it's like we're starting to close out the summer season a little bit, and again getting into the fall season, even though August is still considered summer though. So all right, now we have some Disney birthdays. First up on August 7th we have Isabella Madrigal, so happy birthday to Isabella. And then August 10th we have Peter Parker, which is from the Marvel Marvel movies ones. So like the one with Tom Holland, that's Peter Parker's birthday is on August 10th. So happy birthday also to Peter Parker. But all right, and that brings us to our final segment of the podcast, our Disney memory. Do you have a Disney memory for today's
Well, yeah,
podcast?
when you were talking and we were talking about all the history of Disney and everything, it reminded me of the museum we went to.
Oh, yes.
In California. When we went on our California trip, we actually went to the Disney Museum, which I thought was very interesting because it went through all of these different stages and eras. And I think they really did a great job of presenting it. And it did break down the different times when Disney started, when he had his troubles, when he had to, change his attitude and go to different things. And so that's what brought back the memories of that when we were talking.
Yeah, I feel like not a memory, but just something to comment as well, that I think that is what makes Disney, again, such a top tier company in that sense, that they were constantly innovating their company. Again, it's like they just had, over 10 years of flops, right? But they're going to, again, in the silver era, they're going to come back to the top and going. And in a way that you have the money and the time and effort to keep doing that is just kind of amazing if you really think about it. Even with Mickey Mouse himself, again, at the time in the 1940s, he wasn't really popular anymore. Like Donald and Goofy were more popular. Popeye, Porky Pig, some of the other, again, like a lot of the Looney Tunes characters are going to start popping up too within the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's going to keep pushing Mickey back down. But now, over 100 years later, who is still at the top? Mickey is arguably still one of the most recognizable, most famous cartoon characters in the entire world.
Yep. He just kept going.
It's not to say that some of these other characters aren't still around, but they're not nearly as popular, as beloved as Mickey Mouse and the entire Mickey Mouse cast of characters of Donald, Goofy, Daisy, Minnie, So I think that just really speaks to the innovation of Disney.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what made
So
that museum so interesting, because of Walt Disney and what he did and what his vision was and how he just kept pushing.
Yeah. And I feel like too, it's just like people say, it's like, well, why do you like Disney? It's just like, well, they keep going. It's like they're one of the companies
always
that
entertaining.
They always have the means just to keep going. But all right, thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Make sure you give us a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Also make sure you follow the podcast too on whatever platform that you're listening on. Whether it's on YouTube, you can subscribe, or can follow us on any podcast listening form. Because again, we will be doing the Silver Era in a couple weeks to a couple months time. So you definitely don't want to miss that one. It'll be super fun. I'm sure that episode is going to be like an hour long because there's a lot of movies in that era as well. There's only had 6 movies, right? And we're already at like 40 minutes recording. So we're definitely going to have a lot going on in the Silver Era. So that would be super fun. And we also have some really fun episodes still coming up too. So also make sure you follow us on social media, Almost Amanda X, and let me know, have you seen any of these films in their full, or any of these like your number one films that you absolutely love, that this is like your favorite film that you've ever seen? Because I will say I don't really know any of these films. I would not consider any of these to be my favorites personally, but I'm sure they're probably someone's favorite out there, or maybe like a grandparent has like nostalgia.
Yes, an older person. So like I said, we're not alive.
Yeah. But we'll love to know. Definitely let us know. But until then, we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.